They had written you off the moment you stopped speaking like you knew everything. You let them assume you were slow, harmless, Nalavi, a background character in their script. People with inflated egos are quick to make room for those they believe pose no threat, because they think the game is about proving intelligence loudly. You gave them the opposite. You made yourself small in the room, slow to react, quick to nod, careful never to outshine. Every misstep you pretended to make was a seed you planted in their heads, one that would grow into the belief they had already won. And while they were busy celebrating their own superiority, you were building a different kind of arsenal, one that thrives in the quiet, the overlooked, the underestimated. What they never understood is that feigned weakness is the oldest form of camouflage. A predator does not roar before the kill. You let them project their assumptions onto you until the image they carried of you was so far from reality, they could not have recognized the truth if it stared them in the face. That is the psychology of deception. People believe what confirms their ego, and you gave them exactly that. You acted as though you were grateful for their crumbs of advice, their patronizing smirks, their quiet dismissals. Each time they saw you nod in agreement, they unknowingly tightened the blindfold on themselves. Your silence was not submission. It was measurement. You were counting the beats of the room, taking note of who whispered to whom, who leaned in too eagerly, who overcompensated when laughter was forced. Every careless comment, every display of arrogance, every strategic misstep they made in front of you became part of the map you were drawing in your mind. They thought you were absorbing their knowledge, but you were actually absorbing their weaknesses. You watched patterns form until you could predict their next move before they made it. And still, you kept your posture soft, your voice mild, your questions just innocent enough to mask the hooks beneath them. The day you played your move, it didn't feel like a declaration. It felt like inevitability. You didn't slam your hand on the table or deliver some cinematic speech. You simply shifted a single piece in the right place, at the right time, and the room froze. All their months of underestimating, you condensed into a single instant of realization. You hadn't been trailing behind them. They had been running in circles while you watched. That's the part that destroys people. Losing to someone they respected stings, but losing to someone they dismissed breaks them entirely. It was never about making them look foolish. It was about letting them do it to themselves. You created the stage for their arrogance to walk itself into a wall. And when it happened, there was no one for them to blame but themselves. They would replay every conversation, every time they waved your opinion away, every subtle moment they thought they were teaching you something, only to realize you were storing it away for later. That's the cruelty of the trap. You didn't push them into it. They walked there gladly, thinking it was a throne. The beauty of your act was its patience. You didn't need immediate recognition. The longer they believed the lie, the more devastating the reveal would be. Power built in the shadows is far more durable than the kind flashed under a spotlight. In pretending to be the fool, you had time to construct the kind of precision they couldn't even perceive. They operated in spectacle, in the comfort of being seen as in control. You operated in silence, where every detail could be sharpened without interference. When the moment came, you didn't rise from the shadows. You were already there, standing in the place they thought was empty. That's the part they'll never fully process. They thought they were looking down on you, when in truth, you had been above them the whole time. The only reason they didn't notice was because you had disguised the high ground as the dirt beneath their feet. That's not luck, that's design. And now, after the move is made, you're not chasing the aftermath, you're watching it unfold. The whispers begin. The confidence they once had in each other starts to fracture. They wonder how long you'd been planning it, what else you might have in reserve, who else you might be quietly dismantling. Doubt spreads faster than fire, and you've just lit it in the heart of their empire. The irony is they will never admit how much they misread you. They will craft excuses, rewrite memories, and adjust their version of events to make it seem less humiliating. But behind closed doors, when the noise dies, the truth will gnaw at them, that the person they thought was beneath them had been steering the floorboards they stood on the entire time. You didn't just beat them. You rewrote the rules they thought they owned. They had spent their whole lives rehearsing for moments where they could look important. Every movement they made was exaggerated, every word dressed in borrowed authority, every smile an attempt to control how they were seen. They relied on artifice like armor, believing that as long as they projected strength, no one would notice the emptiness underneath. But then you walked in, and you did something they never prepared for. You were simply yourself, no performance, no costume, no calculated mask. And in a world built on pretending, authenticity is a mirror that strips the paint off their faces. They didn't crumble because you attacked them. They crumbled because, in your presence, their act looked ridiculous even to themselves. Your move was small, almost forgettable in its execution. You didn't announce it. You didn't make a scene. You simply spoke or acted in a way that carried no agenda other than truth. And in doing so, you revealed the weight of all their pretenses. They had prepared for competition, for manipulation, for someone trying to beat them at their own game. What they weren't prepared for was someone who refused to play it. That's the paradox. They were equipped for battle, but your simplicity made their weapons irrelevant. The truth doesn't need armor, and that's why it cuts deeper than any blade. When you are real, you change the air in the room. People who live behind walls feel it first, not as admiration, but as threat. They can't quite name it, but it's there, pressing against their carefully built stories. You didn't need to corner them because they began cornering themselves. Every time they spoke, their words felt weaker compared to yours. Every time they acted, their gestures felt exaggerated compared to your ease. It's not that you outshined them. It's that you made them see their own shadows. The irony is that your power didn't come from effort. It came from release. You weren't trying to outsmart or outmaneuver anyone. You had stopped caring about winning their approval long before they noticed you. And in that freedom, you moved differently, without hesitation, without the constant self-check that defines the insecure. That is what made them uneasy. People who live in pretense mistake effortlessness for superiority because they can't imagine moving without fear. Their reaction gave them away before they even realized it. The sudden over-explaining, the louder voice, the subtle glances to see who was watching, the way they shifted in their seats, as though their bodies were trying to flee the moment. They thought you were exposing them to others, but the truth was more dangerous. You made them expose themselves. That is the cruelty of authenticity. It forces masks to slip, even when the wearer doesn't want them to. You didn't need proof to back your presence. You didn't need a list of achievements or rehearsed lines to justify your place in the room. Your proof was in the way you didn't flinch when they tried to undermine you. Your proof was in the calm you carried when they expected you to break under scrutiny. They kept looking for a crack, a sign that you were bluffing, but all they found was someone uninterested in pretending. And that kind of stability feels like danger to those who live in chaos. The more they tried to regain control, the more obvious their performance became. They tried to dominate the conversation. They tried to redirect attention. They even tried to poke at you, waiting for you to defend yourself. But you didn't. You didn't need to. When you are grounded in truth, you realize that defending yourself is a waste of energy. It only validates the illusion they are trying to sell. And in your stillness, they began to unravel. Days later, they still thought about it. They replayed the exchange in their minds, trying to pinpoint where they lost the grip. The problem was, they never had it. They just believed they did, because most people play along. You didn't. And once someone sees that the game isn't real, it's hard for them to keep believing in it themselves. That's why they avoid you now. Not because you embarrassed them in front of others, but because you made them see the truth in front of themselves. The moment you acted without a mask, you broke the invisible pact most people live under, the one where we agree to protect each other's illusions. You refused. And in doing so, you revealed a truth they weren't ready to face. Control only works on those willing to be controlled. You were never in their grasp. They just mistook your silence for compliance. And now they know the difference. Fear has one condition for survival. It needs shadows. It needs unanswered questions, whispers instead of facts, and the luxury of being unchallenged. That is why people who want control rely on it so much. They keep the details hazy, the story incomplete, the truth locked away just far enough so no one can see its shape. But once truth slips through, fear loses its grip. It is like a candle burning in a dark room. The darkness doesn't fight back. It just disappears. That is why they dreaded the moment you spoke plainly. They were never scared of your strength. They were scared of your clarity. They could handle rumors because rumors could be twisted. They could handle silence because silence could be filled with lies. But when you put the truth on the table, it'd wait. It didn't need defense. It didn't need repetition. It just existed, unshaken. And suddenly, the fear they fed others began to rot. People looked around and realized they had been afraid of nothing more than smoke and shadows. That is when their power began to die. The thing about truth is that it moves on its own. You don't need to sell it, package it, or beg people to believe it. Once it's visible, it spreads because it answers the questions fear refuses to. It fills the space fear once occupied. People start to talk, not with trembling voices, but with steady ones. They begin to question what else was hidden from them. Fear collapses because it cannot stand in a room that is lit from all sides. That is why they panicked, not because you fought them, but because you took away their hiding place. You didn't have to be loud. You didn't have to be aggressive. You just had to be undeniable. And in that quiet undeniability, you dismantled the walls they built. People saw what was real, and suddenly their fear looked foolish. The same crowd that once obeyed without question began to resist, not because you told them to, but because the truth removed the spell they were under. It was no longer about you versus them. It became about everyone realizing they didn't have to be afraid anymore. They underestimated how fast the shift would happen. They thought fear had deeper roots. But fear is shallow. It only feels deep because it is wide. Truth doesn't spread in the same pattern. It goes straight to the center and works outward, collapsing everything in its path. It doesn't just change the story. It changes the atmosphere. Once people breathe in air that isn't laced with lies, they don't go back to choking on it. That's the part they could never undo. Their mistake was thinking they could contain it, that they could silence you and keep control. But fear is only strong when the truth is hidden. Once you revealed it, you became irrelevant to the process. It no longer needed you to push it forward. People carried it for you, repeating it in kitchens, in late-night phone calls, in corners of rooms where they once stayed quiet. Truth moves in whispers at first, then in conversations, then in confrontations. By the time they realize it, it is already too late. You didn't just break their grip. You exposed the fragility of their entire system. They had built their influence like a house of cards, each layer dependent on people never asking the wrong questions. Truth was the wind that didn't even try to knock it down. It just existed, and the structure couldn't survive it. That's why they looked at you differently after that. Not as an enemy they could fight, but as a fracture they could not repair. The real beauty of it was that you didn't need to threaten them. You didn't even need to stay in the room. Once truth is out, it grows without you. Fear needs constant feeding, constant reinforcement, constant control. Truth doesn't. You could leave, disappear, move on, and the work would still be done. The same people who once avoided eye contact with you now look them in the eye and see weakness instead of authority. That shift is irreversible. They may try to rebuild, to patch the holes, to create new fears. And maybe they will succeed for a while, but they will never have what they had before. Because the people who have tasted the truth can recognize its absence. They might be manipulated again, but they won't be loyal. And loyalty is what fear pretends to buy but never truly earns. Once it's gone, no amount of intimidation can bring it back. They wear skin that is not their own. They dress their intentions in borrowed empathy, smile with teeth too polished to be sincere, and speak with a cadence that mimics compassion, but never carries the soul of it. Manipulators do not seek connection. They seek control. They masquerade as loyal friends, devoted partners, selfless advisors. but their true craving lies beneath it all: dominance through deception. They do not build, they rearrange, twist perception, rewrite events. Their world exists only when they can control yours. And that is why exposure is death to them. It doesn't wound their ego. It erases their identity. Because once you see through the facade, once you name what they are, they vanish. Not physically, psychologically. Their illusion collapses. And you expose them. You exposed them with silence at first. That's what shook them. They baited you with provocations, expected the firestorm, but you gave them no reaction, just presence, just poise. And when you finally spoke, it wasn't to retaliate, it was to reveal.